the first on every scene. It's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this burden when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on. When those sirens are gone.
Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of the Unbroken Syndicate podcast. My name is Jorey Hersher. I'm your host. I am a national keynote speaker. I am an attorney. I am an aspiring author. I'm a writer, and if my book gets picked up, I'm going to be an author. And I am on a mission to help people recover from trauma and to prevent suicide among everybody, but a specific group of people who I refer to as the warrior spirits, right? I know that's a little woo-woo, but I'm talking about those who have the warrior's heart, right? This is military veterans, this is first responders, and this is people who, quite frankly, just have a desire to help other people and whose lives really revolve around helping other people. And the reason I'm reaching out to that specific group of people is because we're a really hard group of people to reach. I think there's a little bit of a mentality that because we help other people, that we shouldn't have to need help ourselves. So that's the group of people that I specifically target to reach. The suicide numbers are increasing among first responders and military veterans and the warrior spirits of the world. So that's not okay with me. So we're working to fix that. I have an empathy for those people because in 2017 I attempted to take my life as well. And, you know, there's just I'll talk about this further on in Season 2, but I'd refer to my decision as a business decision. It was cool, calm, and collected. It was what it was. There was no emotion involved in it, and that is actually the problem. But then likewise, it was a cool, collected, and calm business decision to back out as well. And so anyway, we'll touch on that on another episode. But today I wanted to hit a topic that it was really helpful to me, but it was something that took a lot out of me to approach, and that is mindfulness and meditation. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is because when I really started to dig into this, right, I knew that there was no other option. It was just get this fixed or get this fixed. There was no other option for me. I turned to mindfulness and meditation because I had nothing else to turn to. And quite frankly, it felt quite desperate when I turned to it. But the incredibly immediate success that I saw is just something that I can't express my gratitude for what meditation and mindfulness brought to my life. And I'll go into it on another day, but it really changed my perspective of myself, of the world around me, of my relationship with God, with just everything. It just completely changed my life. So I did some searching out there, and I was trying to find somebody who would be a good person to discuss this with. And I found a gentleman by the name of John Macaskill, and John is, he's a really cool guy, and I'm going to let him kind of introduce himself better, but I will tell you this. John Macaskill is a Navy SEAL commander. He is active in a nonprofit called Veterans Path, and he is similar to me on a mission to teach mindfulness and meditation to veterans and help them to transition from the military life into civilian life. And so I'm gonna let you in on that conversation with John, and I hope you enjoy it. And again, I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to having conversations with more of you in the future. So here's the conversation with me and John. Hey, John, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming on. So I want to get to your nonprofit here fairly quickly, but would you do us a favor and just kind of give us a brief background on you, just kind of a history?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to, man. So been in the Navy for 24 years, grew up in Louisiana, enlisted in the Navy in 1996. I guess that's shy of 24 years, 23 years. When I retire, I'll be 24 years. I retire next year. Enlisted in the Navy in 1996, did 1 year, enlisted, then went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, graduated from there in 2001, and then went out into SEAL training, Navy SEAL training. Officially became a SEAL in 2003, and then have been basically in and out of the SEAL team since then in the Navy. So now I am about 9 months shy of retiring, and I'll be working with a nonprofit after I get out. I've actually started working with them now in an internship role. The nonprofit is called Veterans Path, and Veterans Path introduces veterans to mindfulness and meditation in an effort to get them back to peace, acceptance, transformation, and honor. So path, that's where the path comes from: peace, acceptance, transformation, and honor. Anyhow, I got into mindfulness because in the teams, I had ups and downs and had some times where I was struggling with some stress and anxiety and depression of my own, and got introduced to mindfulness and meditation by a psychologist that recommended it. At first, I kind of laughed at him and kind of just blew it off, and then he kept pushing it, and then introduced me to the science and the benefits behind it. So I thought I would try it out. Tried it out for a couple of weeks, went back to him and was like, "Hey man, this stuff isn't working for me." And he kind of laughed at me and was like, "Well, that's like going to the gym once a week and expecting to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger." And so I was like, "Okay, yeah, good point. So I'll try it out for a little bit longer." So I tried it out and continued it for about 2 months, and that's when I started recognizing changes in who I was and how I was dealing with things. And same time, or just around the same time, had one of my military mentors tell me, "Hey, look, if you're thinking about getting out in a couple of years, you need to start thinking about what it is you want to do." And I started looking at the different industries that were out there, and there are there's a ton of good industries, but just nothing that really jumped out at me as something that I was going to be passionate about. At the same time, I was starting to talk with a lot of other transitioning service members, and I was telling them everything that I was learning and sharing my story along the way. And I realized that I was passionate about helping other military members or veterans. And I thought, okay, well, what can I do in the military space where I'm helping veterans and at the same time doing something that I'm passionate about, which is funny enough, it was becoming the mindfulness and the meditation. So at one point I was thinking, well, I could start up a business where I teach this, and I actually do that on the side. I teach meditation and mindfulness to corporate teams on the side. But then I also was thinking I could do this with veterans as a job. And I thought that I could start a nonprofit that does that. And lo and behold, there's one that already exists. Actually, there's several, but Veterans Path lined up with my ideals and values very well. And so I have worked with the military to line up an internship doing the deputy executive director position with Veterans Path, and that's what I'm doing now. So here I am talking with you, brother.
That's awesome, man. I mean, first of all, what an incredible career. And I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate what you did for, for our country and for your fellow service members. So thank you.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate the support, and it's truly been It's been a heck of a ride. I've enjoyed most of it. There's been some ups and downs, but it's been an honor serving alongside the men and women that I have had the opportunity to serve alongside with. And so I look back on it and it looks like the blink of an eye, man. It seems like I enlisted yesterday and here I am 23 years later.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, that's just great. I have a lot to talk to you about, but I think this time I want to concentrate on the veteran's path a little bit. So what drew me to you, what drew me to reach out to you was the fact that you are, I mean, you're a Navy SEAL, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's in American folklore, that's, books are written about you also, but then you come down on this mindfulness and meditation side. And, when I was going through my own path, my own self-discovery, my transition, my healing from PTSD, I used mindfulness and meditation, but it wasn't recommended to me. I almost found it grasping for straws, you know what I mean? Yeah. Just anything I could find. And I luckily ran into it. But a lot of times when I'm trying to teach law enforcement, to teach first responders, to teach military members about mindfulness and meditation, the look I get on their face is probably the look that you gave the person who recommended it for you. So would you speak a little bit to the connection? Because I mean, I can sit here and I can say, I know how it connects to, the warrior mentality, but in your own words, would you explain how mindfulness and meditation actually relate to the warrior mentality?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When you think about it, you think about where mindfulness and meditation, a lot of it draws its origins. It comes from a lot of our Eastern warriors, Far Eastern warriors, right? And somehow along the way, it got mutated into something where it's touchy-feely, and our Western culture doesn't accept it as far as the warrior mentality. Well, I mean, there's nothing more in line with being a warrior than controlling and understanding your mind and your body and getting in touch with that, and then transitioning that into actually being a warrior on the battlefield. So or in the case of first responders, out there on the streets, or in the emergency room. I mean, that's a warrior of a different breed, but still a warrior nonetheless. And yeah, I totally get it as far as getting, kind of that funny look that you've received. Heck, I've given that look to, like I mentioned, to that psychologist that recommended it to me. And now I'm on the receiving end of that look, quite honestly, often when I mention mindfulness and meditation. But I mean, if you think about what mindfulness and meditation can do for you, in being aware of the present moment and ultimately rewiring your brain to respond rather than react, and using the amygdala less, and using the prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain that's responsible for cognitive thinking, more. I mean, who would I want on the battlefield next to me? I want somebody that's going to be thinking through things quickly and effectively, rather than reacting just with their amygdala, and not really thinking through their response. I mean, heck, there's nothing more dangerous on the battlefield or on the street as far as first responders, is somebody who is just instantly reacting with their primal instincts. I mean, sure, there's times when that's what's going to be needed, but not all the time. And that's where you need somebody who is thinking clearly, thinking quickly, but thinking clearly. And if you are able to train your mind to be focused by using meditation and mindfulness, you can actually rewire your brain to where those neural pathways between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are thickened, and messages are transitioned or transferred faster, so that now you are thinking more clearly faster, and you're able to respond on the battlefield, on the street, in the emergency room, in the back of the ambulance, in a fire, I mean, this is truly what being a warrior is about, is being able to use your mind, and then if you have to, use your body to fight or to respond on the battlefield, or whatever the proverbial battlefield is.
Right. And I love the fact that you brought that up, because again, speaking from my own experience, which is the only experience I can speak from, but from my own experience, I remember that as I went in to get treatment for PTSD, one of the biggest problems that I had was this hypervigilance, right? This seeing threats everywhere, and in kind of a weird, warped way that made me feel secure, because I had this false belief that this hypersensitive paranoia is what it actually turned into, but that it was somehow this elevated level of being aware of my surroundings. But it wasn't until I was able to incorporate the mindfulness and really understand what was going on around me, did I realize how dangerous that was. And so that's one of the things that I try to tell people, is that don't feel like you're losing anything by getting rid of that hypervigilance. You're actually gaining. And
right.
So it's great to hear you say it from a different perspective, but yet it's the same cause effect kind of thing. You know what I mean? So
sure. And quite honestly, I mean, that being hypervigilant, it wears you out.
Yeah.
I mean, you are exhausted by being hypervigilant all the time. And at some point, you're going to reach a law of diminishing returns, or a point of diminishing returns, rather. And I mean, if you're on the alert all the time, you're going to wear yourself out. Now you're worn out. Now you're actually less effective and less vigilant, in a sense. So it's kind of counterintuitive. But if you're less hypervigilant, you actually are more effective for what it is you're trying to be vigilant about, right? So
yeah, that's absolutely right. And give an example of that too. And I think, again, said a different way, when I was super hyper vigilant, yeah, I was seeing threats everywhere, but the problem was that they were perceived threats and not actual threats.
Sure.
And so yeah, then you don't get to be able to actually see the possible true threats.
Right. I mean, if everything's a threat, then nothing's a threat, right? And then at the same time, like, think about not so much warriors or first responders, but just in general, people. If we are constantly on the alert, we basically, the way I think about it is, society has evolved faster than we have physiologically. So there's fewer and fewer threats than there were, back in ancient times, when, there was a saber-toothed tiger that we had to be concerned about,
right,
running away from, or fighting the neighbor for food. We don't have to do that anymore. Now we are using the part of our brain that was highly tuned for that fight or flight response. Now we're using it every time somebody comes to us with any supposed threat. So we're in the office space, let's say, and somebody comes to us with the TPS report, from the movie Office, The Office, or was that Office Space? Office Space. So somebody comes to us with that TPS report, and they're like, "Hey, did you get the memo?" Well, now we're taking that as a threat.
Right.
And any little thing that comes our way through the day, that's a threat. And now we're responding with the inappropriate response. We're reacting, rather, with the inappropriate response. And our cortisol levels are going up. Our cortisol levels go up. Now our stress goes up. Our stress goes up. Then cortisol goes up. And it's just this spiral, right? That gets out of control. If we have rewired our brains by practicing meditation, by practicing being mindful, we can actually respond in a more appropriate way, and we catch up with where society has evolved to. So now we can actually physiologically rewire our brain, physiologically shrink the side of our amygdala that is responsible for fight or flight, and carry on like society is supposed to be in this day and age, where we are in this day and age. So not so much a warrior comment, but just responding to threat comment there, in that now we can respond to those perceived threats, those TPS reports, or whatever the tasks are that we get throughout our day, as tasks, not threats. So we can actually reduce our stress level that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. What kind of on that same thread, I teach that that the true fear of our amygdala no longer exists, just like you were saying, that there's no true threat anymore. Not that there's not a true threat, but
Yeah, no, I get it.
it's not as common as we once saw it. But what we have now is we have this fear of being afraid.
Right. Yes.
And so this fear of being afraid turns into the threat of yesterday.
Right.
And what that ends up doing is, like you were saying, that the increased levels of cortisol and adrenaline, we end up walking around with this, hyper elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline.
Yep.
And everything feels like it's about to kill us, when in reality, we're doing that to ourselves. I think that's
absolutely. Yep. And we wear ourselves out, man. So at the end of the day, we're smoked. We don't have energy to put energy where it's supposed to go, into our families, our friends, our own selves. I mean, we're walking around just completely stressed out all the time, and stressed out and worn out. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because, a lot of guys and gals too, but coming out of the military, or they're about to leave law enforcement, or they're about to leave being a paramedic, or whatever it might be. I've had a lot of people reach out to me, and they're nervous about leaving because, I think, one, because that's the life they know, but two, that's where their tools are, right? That's where their usefulness is.
Right.
And I think that the mindfulness, that the reducing the appearance of threat, I think that can help in transition too, because it helps you to reclaim your identity, right? Or to build your identity maybe for the first time. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That loss of mission, loss of purpose, loss of identity. I mean, if you are not in touch with who you are at a deeper level, doing some true introspective searching of your soul, right? And this conversation it may sound a little touchy-feely, but it's very important, I think. If you know who you are at a deeper level, you're not about that badge or that military rank, or the different ribbons that you may or may not wear. Then you're about who you are, right? You can transition a lot easier out of the military, out of the first responders, or out of whatever it is that you're doing, to something else. You don't hang your identity on that badge or rank or whatever, like I mentioned earlier. And to do that, you have to be self-aware. You have to have, I guess, a sense of almost like self-empathy, and know who you are at a much deeper level, and understand the struggles that you've gone through, understand the highs and lows that you've gone through. And once you can do that, I think that loss, that quote unquote, and I'm doing air quotes as though you can see it, loss of identity, there's not truly a loss of identity. There's just a change. And being able to change what you're hanging that identity on requires that deep introspective thinking, deep introspective awareness. And you're not going to get that without having some level of mindfulness. And to improve that level of mindfulness, that comes from regular practice, regular mindful practice throughout the day, regular meditation, and doing, heck, part of meditation is introspective thinking. And if you do that more regularly, you're going to be more in touch with who you are at a deeper level.
One thing that you said that really struck me was that, you said that we're going to maybe sound a little touchy feely, but the one thing that kind of hit me in my recovery was that this identity thing. And I identified so much as a police officer and as someone who was able to reach out and help other people, that I forgot that I became the police officer.
Yeah.
That it was me that did the training. You were and are a Navy SEAL, but the Navy didn't make you a Navy SEAL. The Navy gave you the opportunity and you became a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
You did that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we forget that, and we put too much emphasis on what we were doing and not how we were able to do it. And I think that's a great transition into, whether you're leaving the military or law enforcement or even staying within it, but just changing your mindset. When you move to this new mindset, just the amount of self-confidence, of self-control, and really power over your life it actually gives you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that power is, once you can actually see that you have that over your life, you can do anything. I mean, I think you identify earlier on that you have that power. Somewhere along the way, you forget that you have that, and you just need to refine that as you're starting to transition. Some of us never lose it. Some of us are lucky enough never to lose it. I am not one of those. I lost it along the way. I'm just happy that I was able to re-identify that I had that power within me, and make the transition, the kind of transition to a different identity.
And absolutely. I want to make a couple points here real quick and I'll let you go. But one, for those who suffered severe child abuse, for example, as children, a lot of times I've heard them say, I never had this, belief that I could do anything. And I wanted to just make it clear that yes, you did. Just because yours was taken from you at an early age doesn't mean that it's not innate, that it's not there. Doesn't mean that you can't go find it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't have personal experience with that, but I would absolutely agree. I've seen it in friends, I've seen it in family, that they are able to find it. It doesn't go away. It's just hidden.
Absolutely.
For another way of looking at it.
Absolutely. And then the final thing I wanted to touch on is you spoke briefly about this self-empathy, and I love that you said that, because one of the things that I teach is that our mind has a natural way of healing from trauma. And what happens with PTSD and emotional trauma, depression, anxiety, what happens is we get stuck and we don't complete the cycle. But one of the most important cycles of that whole thing is self-empathy, and it's empathizing with ourselves for the way that we acted, the way that we thought, and the way that we felt during a traumatic event, and then in the days, weeks, months, years that followed that traumatic event. And until we have that true self-empathy, we're not going to be able to recover from that trauma. But then it's that same self-empathy that ends up building you up as you go through the mindfulness and meditation process that actually helps you develop into, the tooled out person that can, take their life head on and accomplish. So.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't even know if self-empathy is a real term, but I think it makes sense, right? Like, you're truly empathizing with your own thoughts, truly empathizing with your own feelings, and taking a step back, almost as though you're looking at yourself from the outside and being like, okay, I can understand why I was feeling that way. So in my eyes, it makes total sense that you're able to relate to yourself.
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, right? So you may have some people listen to your show and be like, well, what the heck is self-empathy? How are you supposed to empathize with yourself? But I truly do think that there's something to it, being able to understand why it is you felt a certain way and being able to, reflect on that.
Yeah.
So.
And on that, I think an example of self-empathy is where, a loved one or a friend, somebody does something that, maybe it's a bad idea, maybe it's a totally stupid idea, but you're able to empathize with them because of the relationship you have with them. But yet, if you did the exact same thing, you'd never forgive yourself. And I think that's the distinction.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool. I really appreciate you coming on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how to get a hold of you, and a little bit about Veterans Path, and
sure, man,
get some people steered towards you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Veterans Path, you can find us online, veteranspath.org. veteranspath.org. And then we're also on all the different social medias out there. So we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. And then I personally am on most of the social media platforms out there. It's just John, Jon, Macaskill, Macaskill. I'm mostly on LinkedIn, but I'm also on the other platforms out there. But yeah, you should just be able to find me by checking out my name, or you can hit me at my Veterans Path account on email. That's John, Jon, at veteranspath.org. So that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, man.
Fantastic. And then if there's any corporate entity that wants to bring you on for mindfulness and meditation, where can they get a hold of you for that?
Yeah, for that's a different account, same LinkedIn, but different email. That's John Macaskill at macaskillconsulting.com. Macaskill again is Macaskill. So, and then I first name John, Jon, no H in there. So that's it, man.
And last thing, if any listener wants to, get a primer, get a real basic introduction to mindfulness and meditation, what kind of resources would you suggest?
Sure. Well, I've actually personally recorded some on the Insight Timer app. If you're looking to get started, apps are a great way to start with, guided meditation, even if you're starting just a couple of minutes a day. And then, work your way up to 20, 30 minutes a day. I think that's where you're starting. That's where you'll really start to see differences. But yeah, there's hundreds of apps out there. Insight Timer is one of them. Headspace, 10% Happier, Calm. I mean, I could really rattle those off for hours, but yeah, those are probably the big ones, and they're relatively cheap, if not free. I mean, Insight Timer has some free versions, and so does Headspace. So yeah, that's where I'd start, man. And that's how I started, was just basic apps.
Fantastic. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye. So, Warrior Class, that was my conversation with the John Macaskill. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a great conversation with him, and it was a lot of fun for me. I look forward to talking to him again and collaborating with him. Hopefully, the nonprofit that I run, the Unbroken Project, and Veterans Path can do more in the future. So, hope you all enjoyed it, and thank you so much for listening and for sharing and for participating in this podcast. So, leave comments and please share this if you enjoyed it. Drop me suggestions, things that you'd like me to talk about, things that you'd like to hear, guests you'd like to hear on the show, and I'd love to get to them. So thanks again for joining me, and we will see you next time.
I'm thinking the worst and hoping for the best. Yeah, we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. It's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this burden when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on. When those sirens are gone, now my shift is finally over. I gotta deal with what's mine.